Suffering is inevitable, but the question you ask about your suffering determines whether it destroys you or transforms you. Friedrich Nietzsche watched his own health collapse, experienced isolation that would have broken most people, endured obscurity while producing some of philosophy's most radical ideas, and through it all, he arrived at a conclusion that cuts against everything our therapeutic culture teaches us. The question isn't, why is this happening to me? The question is, what am I going to make of this? This shift, from victimhood to agency, from explanation to action, from passive suffering to active creation, this is the psychological revolution Nietzsche spent his life articulating. But here's what makes this uncomfortable. It removes the comfort of blame. It strips away the refuge of victimhood. It demands that you stop asking the universe to explain itself and start asking yourself what you're going to do with the hand you've been dealt. So what happens when you abandon the search for cosmic justice and embrace radical responsibility for what comes next? We're drowning in explanations for our suffering. Therapy culture, self-help movements, the endless Instagram posts about healing, all of it oriented around one central question. Why am I like this? Why did this happen? Why me? We excavate childhood wounds, identify trauma patterns, trace our dysfunction back to its origins. And yes, understanding the causes of our pain has value. But somewhere along the way, we confused explanation with solution. We started believing that if we could just understand why we're broken, we'd somehow become whole. So we spend years, sometimes decades, cataloging our wounds, explaining our limitations, justifying our stuckness by pointing to what was done to us. We've turned suffering into an identity, victimhood into a narrative we recite until it becomes the only story we know how to tell about ourselves. And Nietzsche would tell you, this is exactly how you stay trapped. That's where the real prison exists, not in what happened to you, but in your relationship to what happened. You can spend your entire life asking why. Why did my parents fail me? Why did that relationship end? Why did I lose that opportunity? Why am I dealing with this illness, this setback, this unfairness? And the universe will never answer in a way that satisfies you. Because there is no satisfying answer. The universe doesn't owe you an explanation. It doesn't operate according to your sense of fairness. Things happen, often brutal things, unjust things, things that shouldn't happen to anyone. And you can rage against this reality. You can demand to know why. You can spend decades in the waiting room of cosmic justice expecting an explanation that will never come. Or you can do what Nietzsche did. Accept that the why doesn't matter nearly as much as the what now. That the meaning of your suffering isn't found in its cause but in what you choose to make from it. Nietzsche's entire philosophy can be understood as a rebellion against this passive orientation toward suffering. He looked at Christianity, at Buddhism, at the moral systems of his time, and he saw the same pattern. They all offered explanations for suffering, cosmic narratives that made pain make sense. You suffer because of original sin. You suffer because of karma. You suffer because it's part of God's plan. These explanations provide comfort, the sense that there's a reason, a purpose, a meaning outside yourself. But Nietzsche saw the cost of that comfort. It makes you passive. If your suffering has a pre-existing meaning, then your job is just to endure it, to accept it, to find the lesson that's supposedly embedded in it. You become a student of your pain rather than a creator with it. And for Nietzsche, this was the ultimate betrayal of human potential, turning people into passive receivers of meaning rather than active creators of it. His concept of amor fati, love of fate, is often misunderstood as passive acceptance. People think it means, love what happens to you, embrace your suffering, be grateful for your pain. But that's not what Nietzsche meant. Amor fati isn't passive gratitude for circumstances. It's active transformation of circumstances. It's the refusal to waste energy wishing things were different and the commitment to make something powerful from things as they are. It's saying, this happened. I didn't choose it. It's unjust. It's brutal. It shouldn't have happened. And I'm going to use it anyway. I'm going to take this raw material, this pain, this setback, this catastrophe, and I'm going to forge something from it that wouldn't exist without it. That's not acceptance. That's alchemy. Think about the suffering in your own life. The betrayals, the losses, the moments when everything fell apart. Now think about the narrative you've built around that suffering. Is it a narrative of victimhood? Of being damaged by what happened? Of how that suffering explains your current limitations? Or is it a narrative of transformation? Of how you used that suffering as fuel, as teacher, as the raw material for becoming someone you couldn't have become without it? Most people oscillate between these narratives, sometimes feeling empowered by what they've overcome, other times feeling defined by what they've endured. But Nietzsche is asking you to make a choice. Not just once, but constantly. Every day you wake up and decide, am I going to spend today asking why this happened, or am I going to spend it asking what I'm going to do with it? The why me question is seductive because it positions you as the center of a cosmic drama. It suggests that your suffering has meaning beyond itself, that the universe has singled you out for this particular pain for some particular reason. And humans crave that. We want to believe our pain matters in some larger sense, that it's not just random chaos but part of some pattern we could understand if only we had the right perspective. This is why people turn to astrology, to therapy, to religion, to any framework that promises to explain why things happen the way they do. The explanation provides comfort even when it doesn't provide relief. It makes suffering bearable by making it meaningful, or at least, by suggesting that meaning is there, waiting to be discovered. But Nietzsche saw through this need for cosmic explanation. He understood it as a psychological defense against a more disturbing truth. Most suffering is meaningless. It's not a lesson. It's not karma. It's not God testing you. It's just what happened in a universe that doesn't organize itself around your sense of fairness. The child who suffers abuse didn't deserve it and isn't learning some valuable lesson from it. The person who develops a chronic illness isn't being taught patience or gratitude. The individual who loses everything in a catastrophe isn't part of some divine plan. These are brutal facts, and our entire psychological apparatus rebels against them. We'd rather believe that our suffering has inherent meaning than face the possibility that it's just suffering, random, unjust, utterly indifferent to our existence. This is where most people get stuck. They can't accept the meaninglessness, so they keep searching for the explanation. They go to therapy and excavate their childhood, looking for the wound that explains everything. They study their astrological chart, searching for the cosmic reason they struggle in relationships. They analyze their family patterns, their attachment styles, their trauma responses, all in pursuit of the answer that will make their suffering make sense. And again, this work has value. Understanding your patterns can help you interrupt them. Recognizing where your pain comes from can create compassion for yourself. But understanding why you're broken doesn't fix what's broken. Knowing why you struggle doesn't stop the struggle. At some point, the archaeology of suffering becomes an avoidance of the work of transformation. Nietzsche's challenge is this. What if you stopped searching for why and started creating what? What if instead of asking, why do I have this anxiety? You asked, what am I going to build despite this anxiety? What if instead of, why did that relationship fail? You asked, what am I learning about what I actually want? What if instead of, why am I dealing with this limitation? You asked, what unexpected strength am I developing because of this limitation? This isn't toxic positivity. This isn't pretending your suffering doesn't matter or that pain is always productive. This is recognizing that the meaning of your suffering isn't given to you, it's created by you. And you create it not through understanding its origins, but through choosing what you make from it. Here's the psychological shift that has to happen. You have to give up the hope of a satisfying answer to, why me? That hope keeps you oriented backward, keeps you in the archaeology of pain, keeps you waiting for understanding to arrive before transformation can begin. But understanding never arrives in the form you want it to. You can know exactly why you developed certain patterns, traced back to specific moments, specific failures of care, specific traumas. And you'll still wake up tomorrow with those patterns active. The knowing doesn't dissolve them. What dissolves them is the decision to act differently despite them, to build something new while carrying them, to refuse to let them define what you're capable of becoming. That's what Nietzsche meant by self-overcoming. Not transcending your limitations by understanding them, but transcending them by creating in spite of them. Jung would see this as shadow work from a different angle. The victim identity is often a shadow element, something we've built our ego around without realizing it's become a prison. We identify so deeply with our wounds that we can't imagine who we'd be without them. The story of what was done to us becomes the story of who we are. And letting go of that story, even though it's a story of pain, feels like dying. Because it is a kind of death. It's the death of the self that's organized around suffering, around explanation, around the search for cosmic justice. And on the other side of that death is a different self. One that doesn't need suffering to be explained to be transformed. One that doesn't need justice to be delivered to move forward. One that takes radical responsibility for what comes next regardless of what came before. This is where it gets uncomfortable. Because taking radical responsibility for what now means giving up blame. And blame is incredibly useful. It's useful psychologically. It protects you from the terror of agency, from the weight of being responsible for your own transformation. It's useful socially. It signals to others that you've been wronged, that your struggles aren't your fault, that you deserve sympathy and support. It's useful narratively. It gives you a coherent story about why you are the way you are, with clear villains and clear victims and clear lines of causation. Giving up blame doesn't mean pretending you weren't wronged. It doesn't mean the people who hurt you are absolved. It means recognizing that holding on to blame, however justified, keeps you tethered to the past. It keeps you in a position of waiting for apology, waiting for acknowledgement, waiting for the world to admit what it did to you was wrong. And while you're waiting, you're not building. Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, often mistranslated as Superman, is really about this transformation from passive sufferer to active creator. The Übermensch isn't someone who transcends suffering. It's someone who transforms suffering into fuel, who creates their own values rather than accepting the values handed to them, who takes what existence offers, including the brutal and the unjust, and forges meaning from it rather than demanding meaning from the universe. This is why Nietzsche is so often misunderstood as cruel or callous. He's not saying your suffering doesn't matter. He's saying it matters precisely to the extent that you use it to become something you couldn't have become without it. Look at how this played out in Nietzsche's own life. He struggled with chronic illness, debilitating headaches, vision problems that made reading and writing excruciating. He was isolated, misunderstood, often mocked by the academic establishment. His books sold poorly during his lifetime. By conventional measures, he had every reason to ask, why me? Every reason to be bitter, to blame the universe for his suffering, to see himself as a victim of unjust circumstances. And yet, his philosophy emerged directly from that suffering, not as compensation for it, but as transformation of it. He didn't write about overcoming suffering from a position of comfortable detachment. He wrote from inside the suffering, creating meaning while in pain, refusing to wait for better circumstances to begin the work that mattered to him. That's amor fati in practice, not loving the illness, but loving what he made possible despite the illness. This is the distinction most people miss. Nietzsche isn't advocating for gratitude toward your suffering. He's advocating for creative use of it. There's a difference. Gratitude implies that suffering is good, that you should be thankful for pain because it taught you something. But Nietzsche's approach is more complex. Suffering is what it is, often terrible, often unjust. And you can spend your life resenting it, explaining it, wishing it hadn't happened. Or you can acknowledge it fully, feel the weight of it completely, and then ask, now that this is part of my story, what am I going to do with it? What strength can I develop because of it? What art can I create from it? What understanding can I gain through it? The suffering doesn't become good, but it becomes useful. It becomes raw material. Think about the people you most admire. Not the ones who've had easy lives. They're often the least interesting. The ones who've endured catastrophe and emerged not just intact but transformed. The artist who turned grief into work that moves millions. The activist who transformed personal injustice into systemic change. The teacher who used their own confusion to develop clarity they can offer others. These people didn't waste time asking why their suffering happened. They asked what they could build from it. And in asking that question repeatedly, in orienting themselves toward creation rather than explanation, they transformed their relationship to everything that happened to them. The suffering became not the thing that broke them, but the thing that forged them into someone capable of creation that wouldn't exist without that particular breaking. But here's where Nietzsche diverges sharply from most modern psychology. He doesn't believe in healing in the conventional sense. He doesn't think the goal is to process your trauma until you're back to some imagined baseline of wellness. He thinks the goal is to become something that didn't exist before the trauma, to use the breaking as an opportunity for reconfiguration. It's not about recovering who you were before. It's about becoming who you couldn't have been without what happened. This is threatening to the therapeutic model because it suggests that some wounds don't heal. They transform into scars, and those scars become part of your strength, part of your distinct capacity to create and endure and understand in ways that the unwounded cannot. Machiavelli understood this from a political perspective. He saw that the rulers who survived weren't the ones who demanded fairness or justice from the political landscape. They were the ones who accepted the landscape as it was, brutal, unfair, chaotic, and learned to navigate it strategically. They didn't waste time asking why the political world was so cruel. They asked how to move through it, how to use its cruelty, how to transform its chaos into structure that served their aims. The prince who sits around demanding that politics be fair will be destroyed by the prince who accepts that it isn't and acts accordingly. This isn't cynicism, it's realism coupled with agency. It's the recognition that the world doesn't owe you favorable conditions, but you still have the capacity to create outcomes within unfavorable ones. Apply this to your life right now. You're dealing with something difficult, everyone is. Maybe it's a relationship that ended badly. Maybe it's a career that didn't unfold as planned. Maybe it's health issues, financial struggles, family dysfunction, whatever form your particular suffering takes. And you have a choice in how you relate to it. You can keep asking why. Why did this have to happen? Why is my life like this? Why can't things be easier? And those questions will loop endlessly, providing no answers that change anything. Or you can shift to different questions. What am I learning from this that I couldn't learn any other way? What capacity am I developing through this struggle? What am I building despite this obstacle? Who am I becoming because of, not in spite of, but because of, this difficulty? The shift from, why me, to, what now, is not a one-time decision. It's a daily practice, sometimes a moment-by-moment practice. Because the pull toward victimhood is strong, victimhood offers community. There's always someone willing to validate your suffering, to agree that you've been wronged, to support you in your narrative of damage. Victimhood offers relief from responsibility. If you're broken by what happened to you, then you can't be expected to create, to grow, to transform. Victimhood offers identity. In a world where meaning is scarce, suffering at least provides a coherent story about who you were and why you struggled. Giving all of that up for the uncertainty of radical agency, for the weight of being responsible for your own transformation regardless of what caused your pain, that's terrifying. But here's what Nietzsche understood that most therapeutic approaches miss. You don't overcome victimhood by processing it. You overcome it by creating something that matters more. You don't heal your way out of suffering. You build your way out. The meaning you're searching for in the origins of your pain, that meaning emerges not from understanding where the pain came from, but from creating something that wouldn't exist without it. This is why Nietzsche emphasized creative power above all else. Not creativity in the narrow sense of making art, but creativity in the broad sense of making meaning, making self, making a life that stands as evidence that you transformed what tried to destroy you into what made you powerful. Think about this practically. You wake up tomorrow. The same limitations, the same wounds, the same difficult circumstances that were there yesterday. The why me orientation has you spending the day in familiar patterns, ruminating on what was done to you, feeling the weight of your damage, perhaps engaging in behaviors that provide temporary relief but don't change anything fundamentally. The what now orientation has you asking different questions. What's one action I can take today that moves me toward who I want to become? What can I create with the energy I'm currently spending on resentment? What strength can I build through the very struggle I've been resisting? The circumstances haven't changed, your wounds haven't disappeared, but your relationship to all of it has shifted from passive to active, from explained to creating. Jung's concept of individuation supports this Nietzschean approach. Individuation isn't about becoming whole by healing all your wounds. It's about becoming whole by integrating everything, wounds included, into a coherent self that can function powerfully despite internal contradiction. The individuated person doesn't pretend their suffering didn't happen or doesn't matter. They've integrated it so thoroughly that it's become part of their distinct capacity. The wound and the wisdom are inseparable. The breaking and the strength emerged together. They're not spending energy trying to get back to who they were before the trauma. They've become someone new, someone who includes the trauma as part of their story but isn't defined by it, isn't limited by it, isn't waiting for it to be fully processed before they begin creating. This is where Nietzsche's challenge becomes personal and immediate. What are you waiting for? What explanation do you need before you start building? What cosmic justice needs to be delivered before you take responsibility for what comes next? What understanding of your past has to arrive before you commit to your future? Because here's the truth Nietzsche kept pointing to. That moment of perfect understanding never comes. That day when everything makes sense, when you've processed all your trauma, when you finally feel ready, it's a fantasy. It's not how human psychology works. You'll always have wounds. You'll always have contradictions. You'll always have parts of your past that don't make sense and suffering that defies explanation. And you can spend your life waiting for resolution that doesn't arrive, or you can start building now, with all your wounds still open, with all your questions still unanswered. The practical framework is simple, though not easy. Every time you find yourself asking, why me? Pause and redirect. What now? Every time you're about to explain your current limitation by pointing to past damage, pause and ask, what am I going to build despite this limitation? Every time you feel the pull toward victimhood, toward the comfort of being damaged rather than the terror of being powerful, pause and choose agency. What's mine to create from this? This doesn't mean suppressing your pain or pretending your wounds don't exist. It means refusing to let them be the final word on what you're capable of becoming. Nietzsche wrote, "That which does not kill me makes me stronger." It's one of his most famous quotes and one of his most misunderstood. People interpret it as, suffering automatically creates strength, pain is always productive, what doesn't kill you will definitely make you stronger. But that's not what he meant. What he meant is, what doesn't kill you provides opportunity for strength, but only if you actively transform it. Suffering doesn't automatically ennoble. It can just as easily embitter, diminish, destroy. The difference is in what you do with it. Do you let it define your limitations, or do you use it to develop capacities you wouldn't have needed otherwise? Do you orient yourself toward explaining it, or toward transforming it? Do you ask why it happened, or do you ask what you're going to make from it? The final insight, the one that makes this livable rather than just theoretical, is this: you don't have to love your suffering to use it. You don't have to be grateful for your wounds to transform them. You can acknowledge fully that what happened to you was wrong, unjust, shouldn't have happened. And you can simultaneously refuse to let it determine what happens next. Both truths can coexist. You were damaged by forces beyond your control, and you're now responsible for what you build from that damage. The person who hurt you was wrong, and holding on to that wrong doesn't hurt them, it only limits you. The universe was unfair, and demanding fairness from a universe incapable of providing it wastes the energy you could use to create something that matters. Where does this leave you, standing at the intersection of your past and your future? It leaves you with a question that only you can answer. What now? Not what happened, not why it happened, not who's to blame, not what it means, but what now? What are you going to do with the raw material of your life as it actually is, not as it should have been? What are you going to create from the circumstances you've been given, however unjust those circumstances might be? What strength are you going to develop through the very struggles you've been resenting? What meaning are you going to forge from the suffering that won't explain itself? Nietzsche's challenge isn't comfortable. It removes the refuge of victimhood. It strips away the comfort of blame. It demands that you become the author of your meaning rather than the archeologist of your pain. But in that uncomfortable demand lies the path to actual power. Not power granted by favorable circumstances, not power contingent on the world finally being fair, but power that comes from radical responsibility for your own transformation regardless of what tried to break you. The world doesn't owe you an explanation. The universe doesn't owe you justice. Your past doesn't owe you permission to move forward. But you owe yourself the dignity of asking not why this happened, but what you're going to make happen next. That's the question. That's always been the question. And every moment you spend asking, why me, is a moment you could have spent answering, what now, with your actions, your creation, your refusal to let your suffering be the end of your story instead of the beginning of your transformation. If you're ready to stop excavating your pain and start creating from it, to transform from passive sufferer to active creator, to take Nietzsche's challenge seriously, subscribe to Cultoro. We're exploring what it means to build meaning rather than search for it, to take responsibility for transformation rather than wait for healing, to ask the questions that actually change your life instead of the ones that keep you comfortable in your limitations.